This is the first in a series of events we're going to host relative to the uncertain job market. And our next event is May 12th at 5 p.m. And we've got some great expertise on our panel today and on May 12th having to do with recessions and the constriction in the job market. So we're excited to have those guests. A quick update before we get started on things of what's happening at the school. As schools across the country have all pivoted online, the Department of Architecture shifted 42 classes online in a really short amount of time. Our faculty embraced programs like Teams, Collaborate Ultra, Zoom, Miro, and other platforms. Thesis is going to take place over 2 days, May 7th and May 14th. And we've shifted our gallery online in record speed, and we'll be hosting graduation and super jury events on the site in the coming weeks. So check back for on the website at UWM, SARUP's website, for more details about those events if you want to attend. The nice thing about all of this is that you can attend remotely from other places. Even as we embrace this transition as best we can, faculty and students are doing that. We are cognizant of what's happening in the profession and the construction industry that are going to affect our students' ability to get jobs in the near future. Therefore, we've assembled this excellent team of a group of experts to share their experiences to prepare us for the future. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and hopefully those are the people that are on the video. So we have Greg Cook, AIA, got his MArch from UWM in 1981, and he's the principal at Halliburton Root. Greg, can you wave?
Hello all.
Barbara Hughes, who has her undergraduate in 2008 and her master's in 2010. She's an architectural designer at In Studio Architecture. Barbara, you want to wave?
Yes, hi.
And Alexander Walker is an MArch 2008 grad and an MUP 2016 grad, and he's a building plans examiner for the City of Milwaukee Department of Neighborhood Services. Alex?
Hello, how you doing?
And Matt Dumich is FAIA, got his undergrad in 1999 and his grad degree in 2003. And he's with the principal at Smith Group. Sorry, Matt. Excellent.
Hey, everyone.
And then Angie Nygren got her MArch degree in 2010, and she's an associate at Populous.
Ooh.
Angie,
how's it going?
Excellent. So what I'd like to do is start off by having our panelists just talk through what their own experience has been like during the 2008 financial crisis and any other kind of constrictions in the industry that they've experienced. And then I have a series of questions that we're gonna ask, but if you're a student or anybody on the call, please use the chat function to submit any questions that you have during the event, and I'll facilitate those questions throughout. So we're gonna start with Greg, and I'm gonna mute myself, and if the other speakers wanna mute just during the presentation time, and then we can unmute during the Q&A. So Greg, if you wanna kick us off.
Okay, I'll start out. Yeah, I've been at Halliburton since 1981, so I've been here 39 years, and it's unfortunate we're in another kind of a downturn, but I've seen at least 5 of these. There was one when I first came out, and then we had one in the dot-com bubble. We've had several others. The '08 one was probably a little deeper than most, but the thing that we need to be kind of conscious of, building buildings is very much dependent upon the ability to get financing and having confidence. And so when, like the dot-com in particular, basically that was a confidence killer. When the stock market went down, the people that were, especially for colleges, donating money, they stopped doing it. And that had a big effect on us because that was a big market for us at the time. So we see these downturns. And the thing is that surviving it is, a matter of, managing through it. And we've done this quite a bit, and this too will pass, and I think actually we'll come out of this pretty strong. So what did we do? We laid off quite a few people during that time, but it wasn't all at once. It was in different waves, just depending on, you try to keep your people as long as you possibly can. Kind of the main question is, were we hiring? Well, the reality is we did do some hiring, and the decision to hire is more based on it's supply and demand. I can't control when people leave. I can't control when jobs get started or when they actually, grow and start to build. So when we even during 2008, when we knew we were not hiring, I was still interviewing because we wanted to always be prepared for when we did have to try to fill a position, backfill a position, or to build, because we actually did get some projects. So we were hiring, but it was very sporadic, but we did continue to interview the whole time. Let someone else pick it up from there.
I was muted. All right, fantastic, Greg. Way to start us off. And Barbara, you want to pick up from there?
Sure. So I went back to school in my 40s in 2005, I want to say. And then I graduated with my undergrad in 2008. And I was faced with, gosh, it's pretty bleak out there. So I stayed. And that's one avenue I think one can take, is to pursue whatever strengths, skill sets you may feel you're lacking. I went right into grad school and I got my graduate degree in 2010. The job market was still squishy at that point, and I ended up doing contract work for various firms, which actually gave me a really great sort of buffet style introduction to all the different firms in Milwaukee, and some of the bigger firms, some of the smaller firms. The negative aspect of being a contract worker is I didn't have any health care. So I risked it for a good 3 to 5 years going without health care during that process. I leaned heavily on all of my contacts. I think all of my jobs were through friends, not any sort of job board, but Sharda was amazing in helping me look at my assets, my cover letters, my resume, my portfolio. So it's a really good time to skill build and a good time to sort of broadly ask yourself, who am I, where do I want to go, and how am I going to get there? And fresh out of school, you may not have those answers. So it doesn't really matter. Just pursue one of them and learn as much as you can from that particular opportunity, and then just keep pushing. And you'll be amazed. You'll learn a lot along the way that perhaps in a more traditional mindset you wouldn't have. It's more of like fast forwarding through a bunch of different opportunities.
Okay, great. Alex, you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, sure. I came out in 2008, all set to move to DC, and that just didn't happen because it was just a hard time. So I ended up staying around Milwaukee and just doing different contract work, meeting with people, meeting with lots of people, just trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening, and then trying to sharpen my skill set with areas that I was passionate in, which was housing remodeling, affordable housing, and just figuring out how to get into those areas and talking with developers, small-time developers, big-time developers, and just figuring out who's doing something and what are they doing and where I could fit into those plans. So currently, I'm kind of like doing more housing developing and having a bent on those sort of things, aside with doing architecture and design and all that with the city of Milwaukee, building plan examination. My one thing would be to tell people would be to look at your skill set, figure out what you want to do, broaden your horizon that goes beyond just architecture and how that can fit into other things in your interests.
Okay, great, Alex. Angie, can I get you to jump in?
Yeah. So I was on the exact same track as Barbara. Came out of undergrad in 2008, and not because of the recession, just decided to jump right into grad school. And I had great internship, and then all of a sudden, fall 2008, at our firm, a big project went on hold, and another one, and ultimately we ended up laying off about 2/3 of the firm, and myself was included in that. And that wasn't huge for me, just because I had grad school at the time, so I had something to fill my time. But like Barbara said, 2010 is what really sticks in my mind as the great job forage of 2010, when there was just no work available. And so and on top of that, my husband was in grad school at University of Kansas at the time. So I knew I was moving down to Lawrence, Kansas, where I had no contacts, no social networks. So I just basically started cold calling, and got laughed at by a few firms that when I asked if they were hiring. But in the end, it paid off, and the rest is history there. Although I will say, I worked for one day at a Chinese restaurant because I couldn't find work. So I mean, it was 2010 especially sticks out in my mind as just a very anxiety-ridden year, and not much unlike what we're in right now.
Okay, and then I'm going to circle back on what's happening at Populous now, but maybe before we do that, let's have Matt join us.
Hey everybody, nice to see some familiar names floating at the bottom of the screen here. Thanks for joining us. So I just want to reiterate something that Greg said, which is this profession and this industry sees cycles that come and go. And so when you've been around a bit, you'll see some downturns. And I tend to agree with Greg that this doesn't feel, at least not yet, as deep or as bad as 2008, which was, a financial collapse. This is more, in my mind, a public health emergency, but it is having deep impacts in an unprecedented way on the economy. But I do hope it's temporary. So I got my undergrad in 1999, and right out of school, I missed that studio culture, and I joined AIA, and I found AIA to be my tribe, and really have instilled kind of a lifelong connection with AIA, first with AIA Wisconsin, and then eventually moving to Chicago, and the rest is history. But I worked for 2 years after undergrad, and then I got laid off in 2001. Right before 9/11, actually, which was the dot-com bust that Greg referenced. And then I actually got laid off again in 2004, I think it was, right after I got my master's. I took some time to really reflect and to look for other opportunities, and really relied on my network that I'd started to build through AIA. So, as I would recommend to anyone at any time, as a student, it's great to expand your network and to connect with professionals and get out there in the community. And so the second time that I'd gotten laid off, I actually had a job lined up the next day from a colleague who needed help. So I was fortunate, fast forward to 2008, to keep my job through that deep recession. And it started out where I was, and by the way, I'm based in Chicago, although I do a lot of work in Wisconsin. I was working at a great job. I was working on a high-rise hotel project in Chicago, and the job construction stopped after the steel structure was complete in 2008 because the developer had funding issues. Fortunately, I got the opportunity to work on a different project, kind of in transition at that time, on the US Bank building in Madison. We were doing a renovation in addition. And that building was supported by Focus on Energy in grants or incentives. And I'm convinced that those grants kept me employed through the recession because it really unlocked that project. So I was really fortunate to keep my job while many of my colleagues did not. But, you know, I think it's been stated earlier to network and to find other ways to flex your creative skills. And, you know, it sucks that a lot of internships have gotten canceled for this summer, and to some extent that may set you back a little bit, but just use this time to increase your value in any way you can and flex your creativity. So thank you.
Matt, maybe we'll just pick up right there with that last comment on increasing your value, and whether or not can you share some thoughts on strategies to do for students in particular to do that? And on the call we do have undergrads and grads both, so obviously there's a slightly different you know, opportunity, let's say, for those that are graduating and completing their degrees, or those that are maybe in transition between degrees. But if you can maybe start us off with how to increase that value.
Yeah, and in 2008, 2009, while I was lucky to keep my job, I was also the chair of the AIA Chicago Young Architects Forum. And that was a really vital community, particularly at that time when a lot of people were not working and trying to find ways to plug in. So there were some really great success stories and people that I met who were really entrepreneurial. One started basically like a tech startup with no money and had drifted away from traditional practice, which she continues to do today. Also, a lot of people found community engagement and service to make an impact and to flex and share your design skills with communities that may not otherwise have the benefit of working with an architect. And I think that that wave that started maybe in 2008 about architect advocates and people involved with community has really sustained to this day, where we're a lot more civically minded. So find ways to volunteer. That helps build your network. You know, are there ways that you can be adjacent to the design and construction industry? Maybe it's working on construction crew. I know one summer when I was in grad school, I helped friends do some framing on a house and really learn some skills that I do think that firms respect when you know how to use your hands and you know how it works out in the field. So maybe those are a couple things that you could look out for.
That's great. Does any of the panelists want to add to that at all?
I'll jump in a little bit. Architecture is extremely competitive, not only in terms of trying to get a job with somebody else, but keeping a job. And it's the same as when a firm is going up against other firms to try to get it. So you're always trying to differentiate yourself from somebody else. There's so many allied pieces to architecture that all of these skills that you're working on, whether, like you said, it's construction. I hired a guy once from MIT, which essentially was an expert in data analysis. And he would, you know, crunch all these numbers, but he would utilize the information as drivers for design. So, I mean, you know, when a student is coming out of school, for the most part, the only thing that they see as the main skill of an architect is design. But in reality, that's one of the smaller skills that we actually use in terms of actually practicing architecture. There's so many different other aspects to it, you know, from the construction to the analysis to management. I mean, when I came out of school, I mean, my first degree is in business. I was a 3-year grad at UW-M, and I knew coming out, I wasn't going to be a designer. I didn't want to be a designer. I wanted to run a firm. So that's kind of, you know, coming right out of it, I was always able to differentiate myself pretty easily from other people because of my business background and knowing how I could translate that into relationships with the clients and make my designers effective because they didn't have the business background. So the competitive aspect of it, and when you're trying to go and to be hired and you're trying to tell, it's all about the story. So whatever it is you do, whatever your part-time job is, whatever it is you are in the interim, you have to be able to put together a story that is compelling in terms of how you grew into the professional you want to be, because that's probably the most important thing that we do when we hire people. I mean, it's kind of funny, people get so hung up on their drawings and everything. I'm more concerned about how people explain why the project they're working on had something to do with their development and what would they do differently now, kind of a thing.
So it sounds like it's a good time to maybe even reflect on your own portfolio and what you might showcase in there. Barbara, can you chime in on maybe how we were talking earlier about how you were able to use some of the resources at the school, in particular Sharda, who's on the call. Sharda, you want to wave?
Hero.
Sharda is available for our students and alums to help with job search, resume, portfolio. So she's a great asset for us. But Barbara, you talked about utilizing that, and can you maybe walk us through what that sort of looked like and how you assessed maybe thinking about what Greg was just saying about how do you tell your own story, how do you kind of recurate your the things that you have, and how you did that at the time?
So my fallback is fear. I always run into my own fear, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't letting fear make decisions for me, that I was making calculated, strategic choices for myself, deciding who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. And Sharda was excellent for just listening to me talk and talk and talk, and she would look at my portfolio and my resume and my cover letters, and she was able to give not only just question me on how I was framing my own story, but also offering me alternative thoughts. A lot of the projects that I worked on were not strictly in the architectural realm. I ended up working at a lighting company. I taught Revit for Autodesk. So, I mean, I did a lot of things, and seeing, as Greg was saying, those peripheral type of skills, the soft skills of learning how to team build and how to communicate. Projects are all about resolving issues and the design of it as well as the actual construction of it, right? You're always problem solving and working with a team. And so those skills are really hard when you're young and you're not sure who you are, or maybe how to talk to another person. So as people have said, volunteering and doing adjacent type of things gives you the confidence to raise your voice and talk through any problem. As far as how that process works, man, I was hitting all fronts, right? I was talking to friends, I was talking to Sharda, I was researching the different firms, what they had to offer, what type of projects they like to do. And I was just open. I said yes to everything. Anything that came my way, I'm like, yes, I will do that. And it may have seemed tangential at the time, but there's so much to learn in architecture that it all becomes informative to your process, how you problem solve, how you design problems.
Well, that's great. I wonder, Alex, if you can pick up on that a little bit, because you had mentioned finding your passion in the transition, or sort of really honing in on housing in particular, and how that sort of led you to where you are now. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little and think about, you know, I think our students in particular have lots of different interests, and so I would imagine that they struggle with like finding one particular thing that they're interested in. So I don't know if you want to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting finding your passion throughout a downturn. I think that I had the opportunity to realize, or probably get back to my initial thought of what I wanted to do, which was do housing development. And in that time, I worked on some low-income housing tax credit projects, and was partnered up with one of my friends who did that sort of work. And so understanding how to go out and do site visits, and just putting together as-built drawings and all that kind of thing for single-family homes in Milwaukee, talking to city officials, understanding zoning code and all that kind of thing is definitely necessary. And it's a skill that is good to develop, and I developed that at that time. One of the things that I look back on is understanding the whole architecture and development process, which since has become more refined for myself. But understanding when you get out of school, you don't understand about how things are really put together, the entire deal, not just architecture and design, but financing, performas, who starts a project, who ends a project, the permitting process, all that goes into what we call architecture. And so I learned a lot of that in that time span, just really figuring out how this all works together, why people are afraid to spend their money, and or you decide for yourself, I want to be in a position to spend the money. So you look at how you want to do your personal finances to get to a position where you want to be in the future. And also, I also learned at that time, diversifying. How do you diversify yourself, your portfolio? Do you want to do restaurant design? Go work for a restaurant, because restaurants are interesting businesses. Housing, those are interesting. How do you design single family housing? Is it low income or is it high end design? Because those are two different ways of designing something. In terms of, efficiency and whatnot. But it's really interesting trying to get to know yourself in that process and what's around you, and forging a path for yourself. Because a lot of times you just have to go do it yourself to get where you want to go.
Fantastic. Angie, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation. I can't seem to unmute you. Or maybe we're about something Greg had talked about in terms of still interviewing firms. Some firms are still interviewing because you're always waiting or thinking about when the next project is going to come online, or when something is going to start back up. So I wonder if you might talk about what Populous is doing now in terms of the Kansas City market, since we've got people here from Milwaukee, Chicago, and let's see what's going on in Kansas City, but also, so how the firm is navigating right now. Are they still interviewing, or are they laying people off at the same time? It's an interesting.
Yeah. So at Populous, we do work around the nation. So it's not really a Kansas City market, though I will say there have been quite a few projects that went on hold. I haven't heard of anyone getting laid off yet. And I'll have to follow up with you about interviewing. I asked our HR manager, what's the status? Because I know we have job postings on our website, but I'm not sure if those are still relevant. So I will follow up with you on that. But in terms of Kansas City market, it's the same. I mean, projects are going on hold, and I think it's the same everywhere. But our work from home orders are through May 15th, and I think we'll start slowly trickling back in after that.
Well, so maybe a follow-up for all of you might just think about commenting on this, is that relative to the Populous, the job posting that you were talking about, is it, and given Greg's comment, is it worthwhile to send out your resume and portfolio now to firms, or waiting a month, or waiting 2 months to send that out? What's the advice right now in terms of maybe right this moment, because again, we have some graduates that are graduating right now who may not have work at all planned for the summer. So I'm just sort of curious what the sensibility amongst the group is.
So I think right now is a great time to send out applications and to start making some connections. Like I said, one of my big projects just went on hold, so I have more time to make those memorable connections, and you can always follow up once we get back in the swing of things, you know, and those connections will be more memorable because I have more time now to think about it. So I think right now is a great time to start sending applications and reaching out.
Yeah, networking is never an inconvenient thing. I'm constantly networking and have been from day one. And you never know, like Alex and we run into each other at City Hall. Thanks for all your help.
Sure.
And I think there's something called an informational interview where you just go in. I think I had 3 at a firm that I'm not going to talk about by name, but I wanted to work there so badly. I interviewed there 3 times. I never got the job, but every time I went there, I learned something. I met someone. I learned about myself, and I learned about the whole process. So there's no bad time to network. Get started now, get started early, and I got to go turn off a timer in my kitchen. I'll be right back.
And those informational interviews are good practice. Just having a professional exchange, talking about yourself. You know, it's really a presentation of yourself in a way that you need to curate. But I agree. You know, in any time, you know, the hiring situation at a firm is super fluid. It changes weekly, it changes daily in case of winning a new project or whatever that may be. So some of it's just luck and timing, and then persistence. So I would recommend to get your information ready and get it out, and then to follow up. And I was told once I got it called in for an interview because of my persistence, and you keep following up with that person until they tell you to leave them alone, basically. But until they tell you to leave them alone, they've kept that conversation open. So be persistent and polite, but you know, the irony is when firms are hiring, oftentimes, especially in smaller or mid-sized firms, the person is too busy. They're so busy they need help, but too busy to look for help. So have that understanding that just because you don't get a response in a day or in a week doesn't mean they're not interested. So find some rhythm to follow up.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on Matt's a little bit here. The Halliburton is a mid-sized firm. We're not a giant anymore. But the thing is, I was our HR department for 31 years. And the thing is, persistence pays off quite a bit if you want to know the truth. And seeing a similar resume 2 or 3 times is not bad. Because I know that there's someone that is, you know, tried to update it, is still interested in Halliburton. And, you know, and they're interested in that even if we don't get back to them all the time in terms of a denial. I mean, I'm similar to what Matt's saying is, as a medium-sized firm, and I was the H&R department, I'm still doing architecture. So I'm reading resumes, but I'm not necessarily getting back to people about the resumes, which is kind of sad for the ones that send it in. And when I first started, I got to tell you, I was much better at responding, but that kind of went away after you had to meet client deadlines. But the thing is, getting it in and getting in as quickly as you're ready to start looking for work, you just have to do it. Because Matt is totally right. You know, we're backfilling oftentimes. I mean, we're not even posting that we're looking for an intern because maybe I had a project architect that left, which meant that I moved somebody else into that position. So now I'm backfilling that position. So the timing is everything. So you need to research the kinds of firms you want to do, much like the other guy said. Know what are your skills and what is it you want to do, and find the people that do that, what you want to do, and chase them. Figure it out.
There's been, oh, Alex, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that I remembered. On the permitting side, a lot of times we have small contractors come in who want porches or some sort of dormer put on their houses. They don't have any drawings. And so from a skill point and I need something to do standpoint, figuring out how to put a dormer on a house or rebuild a porch, front or back porch, or any small interior renovation. Myself as a plan examiner, I say, people will apply for permits. I say, where's your drawing? And if you can find small contractors that need drawings done and they don't have the capabilities to do it, that's a good way to practice your skill and to learn about the building code in for 1 and 2 family homes in Wisconsin, at least.
That's helpful. All of you sort of talked about networking, and I wonder if you might elaborate on what a virtual coffee looks like, maybe for students to think about, you know, calling or emailing some of their contacts, but in this sort of stage, how do you have a coffee with somebody?
You ask questions. I have never had anybody turn me down. If I ask them for a coffee, everybody's open to it. We've all been there. We all want to help you, and we all want the young people to come work for us. We are very busy where I'm working. We are not laying anybody off. We still have our interns this summer. So it's not a waste of your time to reach out to somebody, because they will remember that personal touch and that you were brave and you took a risk and said, hey, can I ask you some questions? I met with Ursula for coffee one morning, and that led to me being on the Lean House Scholarship Committee. And then through Mo, I ended up doing Women in Design and getting really involved in that. So one coffee led to all these other opportunities.
Yeah, I think that one thing that you may not realize is as a student, especially when you're still in school, you're non-threatening. In architects, we like to talk about ourselves, and we also, it's amazing how collegial and generous this community is. And so reaching out innocently and saying, hey, I respect you. I'm interested in what you do and I want to learn more. Like Barbara said, everyone always says yes. So please don't be afraid, and probably start with a carefully written, maybe a LinkedIn post or LinkedIn request, or follow up with a LinkedIn message. And then I guess, when you do send your resume at some point, always try to send it to a person rather than just dump it on anonymous HR@firmxyz.com, because firms all have protocols for where the resumes go. But whenever I receive a resume, I always just forward it to the right person. So, people will do that for you.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions in the chat space, and I know some of you have answered it in the chat space, but I wanted to bring it up for the whole group, making sure people see it. But there was a question about, are there any useful program skills or professional knowledge that we could learn online during quarantine? So some specifics they're asking for. And I know we've heard some software, even with exclamation points. We've got Revit in there with Angie. But I don't know if there are any. Obviously software is one, and there are, certainly classes online, some free software tutorials. Are there any others that you might add to this?
Yeah, I would say if you can study for your either lead AP exam or your well AP exam, I think those are always useful credentials to have, especially during this time. Anything that makes you more attractive as an employee, and those are two. And I mean, our firm uses Revit for documentation, and I can say it's so helpful when an intern comes in and knows Revit. well enough even just to pick up red lines or jump in a drawing and start numbering rooms, you know, anything like that where you can just give someone a task in Revit and they can go with it is always helpful.
Excellent. There's another question in the chat space. What are new or existing agencies of which architectural practice may reside aside from formal practice? So maybe thinking about what may be non-traditional pathways. And you've talked about some, but maybe some further elaboration.
So I'm currently the in-house, on the in-house design team for Colliers International, which is a brokerage firm. So all of my work is coming through the churn and the turmoil of all the real estate that's turning over right now. It's still architecture, a lot of it's interior architecture, but it's not an architectural firm. I technically work for a brokerage.
I know that some, you know, people that, a lot of architects go down a very similar path, but the people that came into the industry from different angles, I find to be very valuable. Like one of my colleagues worked for a precaster, and just to be able to ask her like, hey, what's the joint sizing here? And, you know, just little things like that. I find that she's very valuable. So to come in to the industry from any angle is, I find, even more valuable.
I think that even gets oh, go ahead, Matt.
I would just add, you know, on campus, and I recall the good work that the Community Design Solutions CDS was doing is a great way to have like basically a real job, but to do work in the community and to help in any way that you can. I expect there's lots of opportunities there, as well as other kind of nonprofit groups may need help. You know, I know some of the work that CDS does is about, you know, assisting with facade improvements, and there's other ways in that spirit that I think anyone could contribute, but look for different community groups that might need design thinking.
And I was just going to follow up with when Greg was talking earlier about his degree being in business and then studying architecture, that complementary skill set, I think, Angie, that you're talking about, like, actually helps quite a bit. So, and maybe it's something that you're passionate about, right? That you're complementing your skill set with. I did have another question, and I don't know if anyone has hired anyone since the quarantine has happened, but how do you start a new job if everyone's working from home?
It's been,
And I don't know.
Can we phone a friend for this answer? Because one of my colleagues who joined in the last month or so is on the call, but there are two people on my team that have joined since we've been shelter in place. And, you know, Smith Group as a national firm has pretty robust HR and training infrastructure. So it's not really for every firm, but lots of touch points, whether it's, you know, kind of formal onboarding with HR or IT to learn software protocols, but also the thing that, you know, we're all struggling with is that social aspect. And so we had someone join last week, and normally you'd walk around the office and introduce that person to everyone. Well, in this case, we virtually walked around and did a virtual coffee like every afternoon. And so I think she did something like 10 virtual coffees on her first week, where she met maybe 6 or 8 people at a time. And so to try to get that social aspect. And I think we're all just being creative on ways that we interact, whether it's the virtual coffees or virtual happy hours, or just different ways that we can communicate and connect with each other. The thing that's been so kind of heartwarming for me is the humanity that people have shown in this tough time. I've got, you know, like you might see my 4-year-old running through over my shoulder here. Everyone knows the types of trains that he likes, and that I'm too loud when I talk on conference calls because he yells at me. So we're like inviting people into our homes in a way. And there's something really kind of disarming about that, which has been really cool.
Oh, that's great. I love the trains. Another question that came up was, if you get an offer that you feel like you're overqualified for, should you accept it in this, given the conditions that are happening? Oh, Matt's shaking his head no.
I mean, I can't, okay, I'm still on. I can't obviously make your decision for you, and I don't know your financial situation, but, you know, hold out as long as you can to get the opportunity that's right for you. Hopefully we're not, you know, in truly desperate times, and you can still be selective. That's my advice today, because I am really optimistic about the near-term future. And so, but yeah, really, you have a lot to offer, and now more than ever, students with technology skills are more valuable and able to plug into a firm than ever before. And so, yeah, advocate for yourself. You have a lot of value to offer to firms.
Greg, I wonder if you might chime in, given your experience over the years in terms of both the financial crisis, which obviously is different than this one, and Matt, you sort of laid that out for us, but like the other constrictions in the industry, and whether or not you've seen whether firms have offered less during these times, or just given the state of the economy.
I think that, you know, this is kind of parallels to your question on negotiation. I do not resent people asking to negotiate when I'm making offers. And when you're negotiating, you know, people want to focus on money. Well, you're negotiating more than just money. You're negotiating your opportunity, but you're also even negotiating the start time. And when I'm getting ready to hire, the start time can be as important to me as the money. And it's interesting because people, especially when they're first coming out of their thesis and they're, you know, beat, you know, they'll go and say, well, you know, I really want the job, but, you know, I need 2 months off to try to recoup. And I'm going like, where are you coming from? I'm not hiring 2 months from now. I've got a job now. That's the reason why I'm looking to hire you. So, you know, that's part of the negotiating skill. And the thing that is important is to be honest with the people. I've had people that have asked to delay their start date because, you know, they had to move to Chicago. You know, that certainly is legitimate. I've had people say that they want to delay their start date because they have a part-time job or another job with a firm, and they want to work to get to a break point. That I respect. You know, in terms of the money, that's important. And if someone is asking for something outside of the range for what I can pay for that, I just tell them that right up front. This is all I can do. You know, but you know, the honesty, you want to start right at the point where you're trying to hire someone. You don't want to trick anybody. I never try to make someone make a decision the same day that I interview them. I always tell them, I said, go home, think about this. This is a big decision for you, and it's a big decision for us. The worst thing you can do is accept my offer, come here and work for a month and say this is the wrong place for you. That doesn't help me, and it doesn't help you. So all of those kinds of things that you're afraid of, you have to start talking to your employer, because the communication is the only way you'll ever have any kind of successful relationship and be allowed to grow professionally. And that's really, you know, in terms of the opportunity, that's the thing that a student has to look for more than anything else is. And I've told this to I'm a member of the large firm roundtable in Chicago, and I've told this to all the others, and they think I'm a little nuts. I tell new employees when they come in and says, look, you need to understand something. You've just gotten a degree that says architect on it. You're not an architect. You don't have a single skill that is valuable to my clients. You've got a lot of skills that are valuable to my architects. So what is important is that Halliburton Root has to be able to develop you into a professional. And we take this real seriously. We give them classes. We review it every year. We make sure that people are still growing. They're working on their way. We insist that everybody gets licensed. And we put incentives in there to help them get licensed. You know, I mean, but those are the kinds of things that you have to do. That's part of what the firms have to offer. We don't expect people to come out of school ready to be a professional. They can't be. There's too much to know. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, that was great. I have one question from the chat space, and then I actually wanted to end maybe with a question about leadership. And the question from the chat space is, from a hiring point of view, what's your advice for international students who might request an H-1 visa?
This one's a tough one. And we've hired international students quite a bit. And from an employer's point of view, there's two things that are of concern. One of which is the first coming out of the F1, but more importantly, if you're going to try to stay with a firm and start working towards H-1B. The paperwork is very complicated, it's expensive, and the thing that is really detrimental to a firm is if you get someone in and you start training them and they start getting good, and especially if they're going for the H-1Bs, they get into a lottery. If the quota is hit early, they can't stay. I've lost 2 people that have had to leave because they were not able to extend their visa, and there were people that are really good. So yeah, that's a burden on the employer. So the answer to your question, and as harsh as it might be, if I've got 2 people and one's a domestic student and one is a foreign student and they're equal, I'm going to take the domestic student. So if you're looking for that relationship, you better be way better than anybody else. And I have hired people in that status, but they were that good.
I think that's really important, real talk, Greg. And I think you're right. As sad as it is to admit, I do think there's a stigma involved or around a H1, and it's just another consideration or another obstacle for you to overcome, like Greg is saying. I would imagine that larger firms are more open to the visa than smaller firms. I don't know that for sure, but they just may be more familiar with what the process entails and may be supportive. But yeah, to echo what Greg is saying, especially over the last 3 years, the lottery system has been very unpredictable, and a lot of really good people have not gotten their H-1Bs and had to leave, which is just awful.
Mm.
So maybe I want to end on a positive note.
Oh, thank you.
Each one is not, is about leader, and maybe it's a little bit more general, and obviously we're at a particular time, but I wonder if you would talk about how leadership affects what students put on their resumes, or what you see in students, and in terms of not necessarily hiring, but what you would want to see out of a student relative to kind of leadership skills that they're developing. We've talked a little bit about maybe more professional skills or technology skills, but I'm thinking more about leadership. Alex, do you want to? I'm thinking Angie or Alex, do you want to start?
So for leadership, that's an interesting question, because I think we're all looking for leadership, whether you are the leader themselves or you are under someone. And having the skills, it's better to know how to communicate and communicate what your thoughts are and where you're going and what you want to do. And those are skills that I think are crucial. It's the communication part. And you can be in charge, but not be like a leader. And recognizing how one thinks and how one communicates, and can confront challenges is the real skill that I would be looking for.
Thanks, Alex. Angie?
Can you repeat that question, Mo, is about leadership in our firms?
Well, I was asking about what maybe your firms look for in terms of student leadership as a skill set and how they might think about it more generally. Obviously, we're in a particular time now, but I'm thinking that this is a question that would, carry across any kind of time frame that we're talking about. Like how does
Our firm looks a lot at service, like how have you used your skills and talents to benefit the good of humanity? But then also communication, like Alex said, is so important, and especially during this time when we're doing everything digitally, to be able to initiate conversations and call someone when you need help is key.
Matt, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I think that everyone in school, everyone in your studio is the same. Your project is the same. The collection of things in your portfolio, when you squint, is the same. Your resume is about the same. So as mentioned earlier about differentiating yourself, because truly, I think, 2020 graduates, you all had the same courses, and your work starts to look the same in some ways. Some people have better graphics, some people tell a better story, whatever. So you're gonna get a job based on your personality. Do people want to work with you? Will people like you? So that kind of charisma and connectivity will go a long way. And then again, just to reiterate, whether it's leadership, service, etc., anything you can do to differentiate yourself from that sameness will make you stand out.
Barbara and then Greg, close us out.
I don't know that at a student level that leadership is expected as if it would lead a team. The leadership I would look for would be someone who's not afraid to ask the questions, say, I don't know how to do that, can you show me? Or doesn't sit and wait to be told what to do, but will initiate and will take action and say, or bounce ideas off you. Hey, I was thinking of doing this. What do you think? Engaging in some sort of relationship as opposed to passively sitting and waiting, for the next step.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. Greg?
Okay, I get to the leadership question in two ways. When I'm looking at a resume, I try to look to see what people are doing while they're going to school. And if anyone has held any kind of a job at all while still, especially in graduate school, that's pretty impressive. Everybody knows how hard it is to get through grad school. It was tough when I went there, and I don't think it's any less tough now. The other thing is when I'm interviewing, I always asked about projects which are done in a team basis. And when they're on a team basis, what were their role? How did they divide up the work? How did they get through difficulties? What was the hardest thing in terms of working with others? And just let them talk about it. And that usually drills down pretty quickly in terms of how people can work in a group setting, because everything we do is in a group setting, essentially. So you need to kind of know how people react and how they deal with that.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for your insight today and your wonderful comments. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and thanks to our audience for joining us. And I can applaud loudly for everyone, and clapping somewhere quietly in the, in the chat space or something, but we really appreciate it. We're so proud of our alums. We're so glad that you are coming from our community, and we're excited to reconnect with you in this format. So thank you all very much. And for the students and guests, we'll be doing this again on May 12th with a different group of people, and we'll hopefully reiterate a lot of the same issues. So thank you all.
I look forward to having coffee with you guys.
Hey, good luck to all.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Good luck to you. Bye. Thank you.